There is something unusual that happens when you spend time around a person who has undergone genuine spiritual awakening. You notice it before conversation begins, before anything is exchanged. They appear younger than their age, not in the cosmetic sense, younger in a way that rests beneath the skin, visible in the eyes, in posture, in the quality of their stillness. Your mind misjudges them. You assume late 30s, they are 52. You assume mid-40s, they are 61. What makes this striking is that these individuals have often endured profound difficulty, loss, betrayal, illness, extended psychological suffering, in many cases far more than their peers who look considerably older. Carl Jung observed this pattern. After decades of clinical work across all stages of psychological development, he noted a consistent phenomenon. Those who passed through authentic spiritual transformation carried a distinct vitality in their physical presence. It could not be explained by genetics or lifestyle alone. Something deeper was at work. And when Jung traced its source, he arrived at a conclusion that unsettles the common assumptions people hold about aging itself. Most people assume aging is simply time passing through the body. Wrinkles mark the years. Gray hair signals experience. The heaviness in the face by middle age is seen as the natural cost of living. Jung's clinical observation suggested otherwise. He proposed that much of what we call aging is not time, but accumulation, the weight of what was never processed. Everything we refused to feel, what we carried for others without question, the parts of ourselves we abandoned to survive, the truths we suppressed to maintain fragile peace. When a person begins to release this accumulation through genuine psychological awakening, a shift occurs, not a mystical reversal, but a measurable change in the nervous system, less tension in the face, less bracing in the body, less internal resistance. The spiritually awakened appear younger because they have laid down a significant burden, one most people carry for life, often without realizing it. Before we understand what is released, we must understand what most people carry. Jung observed that the average adult moves through life in a state of psychological compression, not by choice, but by early adaptation to their environment. You learn which emotions are acceptable and which are not. Certain versions of you are welcomed, praised at school, rewarded in relationships. Others, the angry, frightened, uncertain parts, the self that wants to stop performing, are gradually pushed out of view. Jung called what gathers there the shadow. Not evil, not inherently dangerous, simply what the conscious mind refuses to acknowledge. Unfelt emotions, unmet needs, grief interrupted before completion. While conscious life continues, the shadow accumulates. Each year of avoided feeling adds weight, not metaphorical, but physiological. It alters facial tension, restricts breath, and shifts the body's hormonal balance in ways that compound over decades. Jung observed that patients who avoided inner work carried decades of unprocessed emotion in visible ways, subtle but clear. In the set of the jaw, the tension around the eyes, the slight forward collapse of the shoulders that comes from bracing against an inner world that feels unsafe. Their bodies were engaged in a constant, exhausting task, containing what had never been processed, keeping buried material from surfacing. Sustained over years, this containment leaves marks no cosmetic routine can reach. They are structural. They reside in the nervous system, in chronically elevated cortisol, in low-grade muscular tension so familiar it begins to feel like identity. By their 40s and 50s, many people are not carrying time or experience, but compressed psychological weight. Here the pattern shifts. Those who appear strikingly young for their age have often endured more difficulty, not less, loss that broke them open, betrayal that dismantled assumptions, prolonged periods of psychological darkness. By circumstance alone, they should look older, yet the opposite occurs. Jung's conclusion was direct. It is not difficulty that ages a person, but resistance to it, the suppression of what hardship demands to be felt. The person who undergoes genuine spiritual awakening eventually stops resisting. Often through suffering, they learn to feel what is present rather than manage what they wish were not. This shift, from resistance to allowance, from suppression to integration, begins to release the accumulated weight carried in the face, the body, the nervous system. Jung was clear. This process is not serene. It is rarely comfortable. It confronts the grief left unfinished, the anger burdened with guilt, the shame accepted before it was examined. He placed this confrontation at the center of individuation, the lifelong movement towards psychological wholeness. Here, the reversal begins. When someone finally feels grief held for decades, something releases. Not only emotionally, but physiologically. The jaw unclenches, the breath deepens, the muscles around the eyes soften. The nervous system, long conditioned to contain and suppress, receives permission to stand down. As it exits chronic emergency mode, changes follow that no cosmetic intervention can replicate. Cortisol levels stabilize. The fight or flight baseline settles into rest. Sustained over time, this recalibration becomes visible in the face, in posture, in presence. The tragedy of premature aging is that much of it is preventable, not through discipline, fitness, or products marketed as solutions, but through completing interrupted grief, allowing anger its rightful space, integrating shame that was never yours, ending the exhaustion of self-suppression. Here is the distinction Jung emphasized. It is not the existence of the shadow that ages a person, but the ongoing effort to keep it hidden. The one who has integrated rage, grief, fear, and uncertainty is no longer expending energy on containment. The cost of suppressing what you feel is substantial. Over decades, it shapes baseline physiology. It appears in posture, in the eyes, in the overall quality of presence. When someone looks old for their age, it is rarely the years, it is the strain. Jung also observed another factor, meaning. Those who aged most visibly were not always those who suffered most, but those who lived without genuine purpose, externally successful, internally misaligned. For Jung, vitality did not originate in the body alone. It emerged from alignment with what he called the self, distinct from the ego identity most people inhabit. When a person lives from the self, expressing what they are rather than performing for approval, the system changes. Internal friction subsides. The gap between identity and presentation closes. Energy once spent maintaining that split becomes available for repair, regulation, and basic biological processes that function differently without chronic contradiction. Jung observed that patients who reached this alignment, choosing work that expressed them, leaving relationships that diminished them, abandoning externally imposed goals, carried an unusual vitality. They often simplified their lives, relinquishing what they had chased, not despite the simplification, but because of it. Living in alignment is metabolically different from living in conflict. The face that is not performing relaxes. The body that is not bracing settles. The nervous system, no longer divided between inner reality and outer display, returns to its design. Others perceive this as youth, though what they are sensing is the absence of sustained internal effort, the effort of not being oneself. This is not primarily about rituals or external practice. It is the psychological work of radical honesty. Jung's insight into aging was not a health regimen, but a psychological principle. Jung observed that premature aging is not evidence of cruel biology, but of prolonged internal suppression, performance, self-abandonment, inauthenticity, states that generate physiological stress beyond what time alone would produce. The reversal, a genuine awakening that reclaims what was suppressed and integrated what was hidden, alters more than mood. It changes appearance. The face, posture, movement, and overall presence shift in ways that are difficult to explain through conventional models of aging. Jung was not describing a mystical exception to biology, but a practical relationship between psychological integration and physical vitality. Such a person does not stop time. They stop accelerating decline through the ongoing accumulation of burdens never meant to be carried indefinitely. The spiritually awakened individual has not found a shortcut or avoided suffering. In most cases, they have endured more difficulty than average, yet they no longer resist what life demands be faced. They have felt more fully, lost more completely, and broken open in ways most people avoid for a lifetime. They carry less in their face not because less occurred, but because they processed it. They completed grief rather than storing it. They integrated the shadow rather than hiding it. They stopped performing and began living, often at social cost, relinquishing roles and identities that once defined them. What they reached was not comfort, but authenticity, alignment, a way of being that generates vitality instead of draining it through inner division. The face reflects this, not cosmetically, but physiologically. The eyes of someone who has stopped deceiving themselves differ from those who have not from superiority, but from expenditure. Self-deception consumes energy. Ending it restores something visible. What others attribute to genetics or lifestyle is often simpler. A body no longer at war with itself. A face no longer braced against reality. Eyes that have confronted darkness and returned carrying less. This is what Jung observed and spent decades documenting.
Calm awaits on the other side of psychological honesty, avoided not from incapacity, but from ignorance of the cost. You may have seen it in others, or glimpsed it in yourself during a moment of release, when your reflection seemed unfamiliar. It was not illusion. It was the nervous system without its usual burden. The path is uncomfortable. The result is not mystical or dramatic, only unmistakably alive. And that aliveness is visible, often to others before it is recognized within.